Welcome everyone to our April webinar. It is titled Moving the Needle, and we're going to be moving through the sales execution maturity curve today. I want to quickly intro myself. My name is Laura Hall, and I am the Vice President of Marketing at Revegy. And I will let Joe, my counterpart in sales, introduce himself.
Hey everyone, I'm Joe Monastiero. I'm the VP of Global Sales at Revegy, and thank you all for coming and joining us for another webinar. I know how much you all enjoy them, as much as we enjoy giving them, which is great. So today, as Laura said, we're going to be talking through the sales execution maturity curve, the first 3 stages of that. We're also going to be talking how advancing along that curve can tangibly drive impacts to both your business, to your business from both a monetary and cultural perspective, as well as the 3 elements that we consider the levers to driving that maturity forward, which are people, process, and technology, and ways that you can coach your team to consistently execute on the sales strategy that you either have in place at the maturity level you're at, or that you are developing today.
Yeah, thanks, Joe. This is the sales execution maturity model. And before we get into this, 2 things real quick. We want this to be an interactive session, so please jump in with any questions, comments you have throughout. I know webinars can be a little bit monotone sometimes, so we like to keep it conversational. If you've been on one of these before, you know that to be true. To help kick off the conversation, we're going to have a couple different polls. First one now, asking you all where your organization falls on the maturity curve. So we'll pop that up, and I'm going to quickly run through the curve while you all are answering that poll question. It's fairly straightforward, right? This makes logical sense. Ad hoc, you're unpredictable and lumpy. People are kind of doing whatever they're going to do. Which a lot of times, it's surprising to me how often you see that happen in some larger organizations. But we all know what this feels like. In tactical, you're starting to get execution plans documented and reviewed, but this is still largely driven by those frontline sales managers. And as such, it's not consistent organizationally. You don't really have reliable data to refer to. The next phase is integrated. This is where you are getting to that consistency. You've started introducing common technologies to enable that sales planning and coaching and the execution throughout the sales organization. Data becomes more reliable, coaching becomes more reliable at this point. And then the last 2, we're going to dive deep into these 2 in our next session. So we're going to focus on moving through those first 3 today, which, I mean, Joe, you can speak to this in the customers and prospects that you're speaking to, but I would say most of the people that come in through our sales funnel are generally a tactical, a lot of times even ad hoc. So it's not uncommon. Don't feel bad if you're there.
No, I would say that 80% plus are going to be in those first 2 stages, and you'll see some transition to that integrated state. But what's really interesting about that is a lot of these organizations, when they come and talk to us, they understand that there's various elements to this that need to drive the maturity forward. But it's funny how many think that, I'll just implement a new process or methodology and that'll do it, or I'll buy a new piece of technology. I would love to say that Revegy is a silver bullet and sure, buy us, and then tomorrow you'll be strategically managing all of your accounts and deals and reduce that gap from leading to lagging indicators. Yeah, no. That's not how it works.
That sounds like marketing messaging to me, Joe.
As you'll see later on, as we get toward the back end of the presentation, there are some critical elements here across people, process, and technology that really determine where you're going to sit and what levers you really need to pull to drive that maturity forward.
Yep.
It looks like we have some results from the poll. Laura, do you want to go through those?
Yeah, it looks like we have 10% at ad hoc, 15% at tactical, 40% at integrated. You guys are doing a really great job. I'll be interested for some live feedback as we're going through this. If you found yourself, if you find that to still be true as we're going through the characteristics of each stage, or maybe even if you think you might have progressed further into those intelligently managed, where you're using those sales plans and sales execution playbooks to inform larger revenue planning projects, or in strategic when you're actually your cross-functional teams are referencing those execution plans, and your entire revenue organization, marketing and sales and customer success are working together to deliver that customer experience and drive results. And then we do have 15% at intelligently managed and 20% at strategic. You guys in strategic, I am very impressed, proud of you. I hope you are the Revegy customers on the call.
Yes, or you're just the Revegy folks on the call and you're just calling out how great of a job Laura and I are doing at driving the process. That's always good too. Now, and it's really interesting here. I'd love to hear a little bit more, and we can actually do this live in the comments now outside of a poll, really what good looks like in terms of sales execution here for you. So, what that critical element of sales execution is, what that term itself means to your organization. And, I'd love some answers from the various people in here that said, especially that are integrated or above on this maturity model.
We actually had somebody comment when I was congratulating those people in strategic, saying their company's aligned on their approach to the market and everyone understands how to win. That is exactly where you want to be. That's the nirvana state of this curve. A couple more right here. Consistent quota attainment. That would be nice to have. I think we would all like that. I would expect that to happen up and integrated. So that's a good place to be.
One of the ones that's coming in that I see also that kind of is tied to that quota attainment, the predictability around process and performance. And I think that's a key element that drives confidence in the actual quota attainment and the forecast, which is big from a sales leadership and executive perspective.
There's another one too, Javier, streamline top-down and bottom-up data insights. That would be amazing to have. At that point, I would say, Joe, you probably have a revenue operations function versus that sales ops function.
Yeah, and that integration between the various platforms you have and the analytics, that it's actually something we'll talk about later on in this as well, but that integration of data that's going to give you a sense of what good looks like, but also the ability to drive efficiency and evolve out some of the inefficiencies that may exist. So it looks like we also have consistency on process used, but perhaps not necessarily consistent on the technology used to get there. So, I really like this one, and it calls out that separation between people, process, and technology, and the various elements of how you can drive, technology as a lagging maturity, and the people and process is really those leading. Because from my belief, you could get up to this integrated stage using static documentation. And really having that consistency around the process, and that's what's going to get you there. But it really isn't until you bring the technology in to create a digital collaborative environment that drives that evergreen documentation. That's when you move to that intelligently managed or strategic state.
Yep, exactly. Speaking of moving, let's move along to the next slide here. Some of the more specific characteristics of the ad hoc stage. I really like this slide because when Joe and I were making it, I was saying, well, why are there any benefits to ad hoc? But when we started talking through what that might look like, especially in light of the craziness that was last year, you're quick to pivot. If you don't have a lot of process and technology in place, you could pretty much do anything. It might be a little chaotic, but that could be a benefit.
Yeah.
And if you're one of those organizations that doesn't have an enablement function or a dedicated sales ops function, or maybe a more junior person in that role, it's very easy to manage. You don't really want to bite off more than you can chew. And it's back to that people, process, and technology alignment. I mean, if you don't have the people to support it and the processes in place to support moving through maturity, maybe ad hoc is a good place for you to be. And then the last part, it's a little bit of a double-edged sword. Salespeople do what works for them. That works for your A players. If you're lucky enough to have a whole organization of A players or rainmakers, good for you. Congratulations. Salespeople certainly like it because they like to do. Everybody knows, how they work best. They don't want you interfering with their process. So salespeople are pretty happy in ad hoc.
Yeah, they like that whole work smarter, not harder piece of it. And I know I've been there a lot. And it's, what minimal amount can I do to make sure I win every single opportunity that's possible there? And so as you can see on the drawbacks here, that salespeople really doing what works from them is also a drawback because it really drives no consistency in that process, which means you have no information that you can say, this is the trend that shows here's what we should be doing for steps 1 through 10 to win these opportunities, plan these accounts, understand our customer needs, so on and so forth. And that kind of drives into that repeatability of the motion. If there's no true data, there's no repeatability, there's very little predictability there. You can't analyze those trends. And ultimately, at the end of the day, when you're having losses, which no matter what you're going to, and the majority of what opportunities you walk into are likely going to be losses, you can't peel back that onion and understand why those losses existed. And I think for me, and Laura, you can chime in on this too, but for me, that's the biggest piece here. I drive a culture of success and growth as opposed to success and failure. And without that learning opportunity and the ability to do the post-mortem on these opportunities, you really can't have that growth mindset. And it just becomes a loss that you sweep under the rug and hope it doesn't happen again.
Yeah, for sure. We try to do that. I mean, just generally culturally too. I mean, the marketing team we view as an extension of the sales team. We meet a whole lot, and we constantly talk about if something's not working, let's cut the cord and do something else, right? Let's learn from it, understand why it didn't work, and correct it immediately. There's no reason to sit in something that's not successful.
Absolutely. Last comment here. This is definitely the fail fast stage of any sales organization or any organization in general. See what works, see what doesn't work, move on to the next thing, and don't dwell on what isn't working. And I think that's another kind of main benefit here to that ad hoc piece.
Mm-hmm. To move on and talk about the different roles and their perspectives in the ad hoc stage.
Absolutely. So here we're really seeing 5 main personas: the CRO, sales leader, sales operations, sales enablement, which sometimes can be the same person. Unluckily for them, if they are the same person, that's a lot to have on their plate. And then obviously your sales reps are individual contributors. So from the top of this, at the ad hoc stage, the CROs or C-level executives need more consistent results. The sales leaders are saying that they don't have visibility into what's happening to really drive that consistency of results or even consistency in forecast, which also, drives lack of confidence there. So from that top level, there's a real need for confidence, for predictability, or just visibility into what's happening in the lower levels of the organization.
Yeah, and you'll see that visibility theme carry through too to sales ops and sales enablement. If they don't have consistency of data, consistency of reporting, and that comes with the people and the processes, they can't provide it. And it's frustrating for an operations person. That's when that person has to stay in the weeds and they're just tinkering with Salesforce reports that at the end of the day are largely meaningless. Same for sales enablement. They can't provide the right coaching. Yes, they probably know best practices around onboarding or things that they should be reinforcing, but they don't really know what works. And there's no way that coaching could be targeted or on time.
No, absolutely not. And much to the sales enablement person's, chagrin on this, they have no process. The salespeople are saying, well, I don't have a repeatable process to follow. So how do I know what good looks like? What's going to guide me to be successful? And this is critically important on onboarding, bringing your C-level players up to B level, your B up to B plus, or, so to speak. Your A players aren't going to care because those are the folks that do whatever they want anyways. But the B and C players and those new people are going to really struggle getting up to speed. And that's going to increase your ramp time, which is just going to negatively impact revenue overall.
Well, and something you said there, it's interesting, is those A players are going to do whatever they want anyway, which is largely true. We can all admit that. But how are you going to learn from it if you don't have the data behind it to understand how you can build your B players up to become A players? And we've all seen the statistics on if you can just move that forward, what a huge impact that can have on your revenue.
Oh yeah, even 5 to 10% increase in success or just overall efficiency. It changes the game from an organizational perspective.
So I'm curious here, we're going to have another poll. Who do you all see as that top driver of sales execution? So generally there's one person that's kind of, maybe they've come from an organization that was a little bit more mature. They know what good looks like and what's possible. They're coming in kind of knocking on the door saying, hey, we need to do something a little bit different here. This isn't sustainable. And then a follow-on, this isn't the poll question, but a follow-on to that too that I was thinking about was, who's the first person that they should go to identify kind of an internal champion, since we're all familiar with that language. You need somebody backing you up saying, yes, this is a good idea.
I love that question, Laura, and it brings me back to, I was reading an article from Harvard Business Review today that talked about transition change, whether it be negative, positive, or due to a negative or positive event. We all saw the negative events of last year, but it's how do you drive that change as a leader through your portion of the organization and get the buy-in? And what you just said is critically important to that. Who is going to be that main champion that's going to rally the troops, so to speak, and really get them behind what's happening from a C-level down, to make sure people are positively transitioning and feel they have ownership of that and going to really just push forward and not continually question. As you know, a lot of those changes can drive analysis paralysis, which again, in sales time kills everything. So you can't have that happen.
I think we're all familiar with that common issue. This is very interesting, actually. This wasn't my prediction we were talking about before, but the vast majority of you see the sales leaders as the top driver of sales execution here. Another interesting piece, 16% say the CRO, that was my guess. 11% say sales ops, 11% say the sales reps themselves, also surprising. But I think the most shocking thing to me is 0% said sales enablement.
See, you know, I don't find that as shocking. The biggest piece to me here is that sales reps are tied with the CROs. So this is definitely not necessarily a middle management play, but that senior management managing up to the C-level executives, making sure that they're taking the initiatives that they're asked to drive forward, and then also pushing down and managing down into their groups, making sure that they have that buy-in or ownership. Sales enablement for me is kind of a slow follow here, right? They're the ones that are going to be given that initiative and that process and said, okay, great, now make sure it makes sense and then carry it forward. Now that's not always the best way to do it, but they need to have buy-in also. But I feel like that's in line with what I've seen a lot from our prospects.
Yeah, we have a couple comments here too about the frontline sales managers are the critical leaders for execution. I could not agree with that more. It still surprises me that they'd be the top driver at the initial stages, but I love that. I mean, that's fantastic.
Yeah, you know, that's very true. And we see that a lot with the partners we work with. They have a multi-pronged approach to how they're going to accelerate adoption, how they're going to drive value out of the gate. And it all aligns with the approach of taking that management layer or that sales leadership layer and having it be the main focus to drive the rest of the organization forward. Obviously, as we said, it has to come from the initiative perspective at the C-level, and it has to trickle down into the individual contributors. But you know, I completely agree that that leadership layer is what's going to really be that critical driver.
Mm-hmm. Got another question on here too from Dick. A lot of sales goes by the channel instead of direct. Do you take this into account?
So yes, that's going to depend. And at Revegy, we've actually put a lot of effort into developing our sales channel over the last 6 months or so. And what we found is it's almost as if when we're changing that internal process, it needs to be reflected for that channel sales. So there needs to be this collaboration or this single view to the customer that both the channel and the sales leadership or sales team is aligned. So I still think that the sales leader is really going to be driving this forward, and they're going to have to push this to the channel leaders, which I still consider a leader there as well, but push that to the channel leaders to articulate that messaging and those changes to the channel approach, right? And that has to, or you and I were just putting together enablement documentation today for one of our partners, and it has to follow through in that documentation. If you're making a change, if you're driving a maturity adjustment, a process adjustment, people, technology, whatever it may be, it has to make sure, or you have to make sure that it's in that enablement documentation. So it's not just this, you know, thing in the ethos, but it can actually be directed and articulated easily.
Yeah, and if you're an ad hoc, you're probably not able to take advantage of channel, at least not fully take advantage of it, because if you don't have a lot of the stuff in place, your channel's just out there floundering, just the same as your sales reps are as well.
You're taking referrals from them, and you're driving like a referral, and the salespeople on your end are still pushing 90% of that sales process.
Well, let's keep moving and talk about how you get out of ad hoc. How do you move on to tactical? All right, 3 elements here. Again, people, process, technology. You're going to hear us repeat that and probably get sick of us saying that. But your people, I mean, we literally just talked about this. Your sales managers are there to enforce adherence to all of this. They have playbooks. They're coaching reps to follow those playbooks to be able to execute more consistently. Those are the main drivers, just like David said in the comments up here. And your enablement function is focusing on training and adoption. This is going to be really important to get people moving in the same direction and be able to up-level people that are in those C or B areas, or onboard people that just kind of out there. If they don't have a lot of structure around it, they don't know what good looks like, and how can you expect them to execute on anything? They're just going to be there for 60 days and then churn.
Yeah, which is never a good thing, because that costs a lot of money. as we all know, right? So in terms of the process here, there's really two elements. So the sales leadership structures and drives a relevant sales process. Now, for me, it's important to take the opinions and views of both the high-level C executives, as well as the individual contributors, right? Get that ownership, get that buy-in. So when you do roll out that full process, regardless of what it looks like, you're going to have people saying, okay, my input was considered. I'm going to drive this forward. And secondary to that, the sales enablement function is driving the common usage or common practices in CRM. So you want to correlate what you're doing from the sales process to what's being captured in your CRM or in the analogous technology that you're using, whether it's a spreadsheet, Google Docs, whatever it may be. Because some folks are still doing that, even at the higher end of the company size. And then from a company or a technology side of the house, sales ops is instilling the usage requirements for CRM. This is where you get the all stick, no carrot approach sometimes, where if you don't use the sales tools that are provided and bought for you, you're not going to get commission and you're not going to be considered in good standing. Now, there's varying degrees of that. I personally put that in our comp plans to make sure that Revegy is being utilized, both from the fact that it makes us successful, and you need to know the product to be able to sell the product. So being in it more really drives that success. But the better understanding you have about your opportunities, the better you're going to do through that entire opportunity sales cycle. And then finally, ops and enablement begin planting seeds for additional sales technology. This is where you start to identify the gaps in your revenue stack. Do we need sales engagement? Do we need some back-end customer success? Is account-based marketing really where we need to go next? What does that look like? And can we start collecting the data to define what we need next?
Yeah, as much as we invest in CRM and sometimes unwillingly so, it's not all you need, right? It's clunky, it's difficult to use in a lot of cases, it's not very visual. Your salespeople don't like working in it. So at this point, you're starting to think, okay, how can I solve for some of this? On to the next piece of tactical. We're going to revisit the benefits and the drawbacks, but look at them through the lens of the tactical stage here. Benefits here, you're still pretty simple to adjust. If you're tactical, it's point solutions, it's simple processes, simple playbooks. If you need to change it up, it's not going to be the worst thing. They're also pretty easy to manage still with those organizations with little ops or enablement support. If you remember, we said enablement's focusing on training and adoption. That's really kind of the base level for what you want your enablement people doing. Same with sales ops, enforcing usage of the CRM. They're not getting too in the weeds. They're certainly not at a revenue ops level. So this is still pretty manageable. And then you'll see again a double-edged sword. Salespeople mostly do what has worked in the past.
Yeah.
So hey, there's consistency.
Yeah, exactly. Salespeople are always the consistent, good and bad of an organization sometimes, depending on what level they're at or what their attitude is per se. But so yeah, again, here, they're mostly doing what's worked in the past. That's going to, you're building off of what has worked. And you're going to see a lot of those, I would say probably, and Laura, tell me if you agree with this, the B players are really going to be the B plus players where that consistency exists. They're learning from what their wins and losses have been. They're starting to grow personally and professionally into what they'll become, and if they can keep leveling up to that A player, but they're taking input from what they've seen and what they've done and really honing their process there.
Yeah, I totally agree.
Yep.
But they're still with that consistent execution piece. They're still kind of observing and learning. Yeah. They've got that training and adoption piece from enablement, but they're really not going through this development process like you might like them to.
Right. They're still being opportunistic. You still have that tactical approach, that the happy ears pop up every once in a while, and you're skipping steps in a sales cycle, and at the 11th hour, that could kill a deal. You get the wrong stakeholder, you articulate the wrong value message, or don't build out an executive summary the right way. That's going to put you, behind your competition very quickly when it comes to the end. Now, obviously, this is going to drive some predictability. So there's going to be some data that can be analyzed there and drive some trends to show potentially what good can look like. Still not fully shored up. You don't have everything in there. And then here you got the frontline managers being able to provide coaching, but in a one-off sense. So there's no real prioritization. You're not predetermining risk or mitigating that risk in any way. Still very reactionary here in a lot of cases.
Yeah, Joe, I'm sure you've been here before, but how often would you have liked to have visibility into a deal that your sales rep lost right before they got to know?
Yeah, that would be phenomenal. Right before they pull you in for coaching the day before, and then all of a sudden the next day it's lost. And if only it had been a week or 2 weeks prior to that, or we had known what was happening in that company. No, absolutely.
Yep. Let's look at these role perspectives here at the tactical stage again.
Yeah, absolutely. So here again, same five, but the CRO now, they're looking for more rigor around forecasting. So they're looking to the sales leadership to say, great, now we have forecast numbers, but what's the data behind these? Why are you confident in this? And what is your final number really going to be? So they really want a better articulation of that detail and more confidence in it. The sales leadership is saying that they need more visibility to provide coaching. Again, one-off coaching, very reactionary. If they had more detail, they could drive proactive coaching and make sure that they were mitigating that risk prior to it coming up, or visualizing blind spots where before they weren't able to have that forward-looking approach.
Yeah, very similar story for ops and sales enablement. I mean, the sales leader would love to have that detail on where's he or she going to get it from. A lot of the work that ops is doing, but if ops can't reliably report on those trends, that's where the breakdown is. Same deal with sales enablement. If they don't have enough data to really understand what works, why are your A players winning every time? They really can't provide the best coaching possible to it. It's kind of, they have enough just to kind of be scary about it. But if the CEO came to them and said, this is a life or death situation, I need you to confidently tell me if this number is going to happen, they're not going to take that. They're not going to be confident and be able to answer that question.
Yeah, no, not at all. So in terms of the actual sales reps themselves, again, works into that. There is not a defined process to drive consistent execution. They have some details in there. They're working off of their personal experience, but they're looking to sales ops and enablement to say, okay, based on what we've seen, what do I do next? And obviously, as you can tell, sales ops and enablement don't have that fully defined. So it creates an issue. And, I'd love to ask another question in here too. I know we didn't plan this one, but in terms of driving maturity of your sales reps and really growing them from those C or B players up to the highest level they can get to, because not everyone's going to be an A player, right? But what are you seeing as the best tactics to do that in a strategic or long-term way? So not really just, from deal to deal, but over the course of someone's career, your organization, what are the key elements that you're doing to drive their personal sales execution maturity? And you can just throw those in the comments and we'll jump to the next slide and answer or look at those answers as they come in.
Yeah, good question. I think the counter question to that too is, are you coaching your A players at all? Because they're doing their job, but they still need some attention, right? Even if it's just a pat on the head or just second set of eyes on something, you can't just leave them out there by themselves. That's when you have churn from them. They don't have a whole lot of stickiness within the company.
Yeah, and I've always loved this too, as you pull it back to the sometimes you need to fire your best salesperson. Are they being toxic in any way? And can coaching or adding some detail there help them go for it? That pat on the head, is it going to stop them from becoming toxic in the organization?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it looks like we have a suggestion in here too of showing the value that they receive from adapting. Yep. That's such a great point. And back to that A player comment, if you can show them, hey, person A is doing X, Y, Z, you're not doing this and you're not winning, but person A is, learning by example is so powerful.
I think it's the biggest play right there. You can highlight that this isn't just theoretical or pie in the sky thought. It's real. This is being done by XYZ people. If you do this, there's a higher likelihood you're going to win and be far more successful.
Yeah, it's the best way to drive technology adoption, process adoption, any kind of good behavior. Perfect learning by example.
Absolutely.
Let's keep moving here though and figure out, how do you move from tactical up to integrated? I think integrated is where things really start getting real. This is where once you get there, you're on your way to really executing consistently, impacting top line revenue, visibility is starting to get there. Your people, your sales leaders are using data to provide that targeted on-time coaching. Back to the comment we just had, it's not somebody coming in the day before the deal is set to get signed and not getting advice early enough and the deal doesn't get signed. You're eliminating some of that. And executive leadership is communicating the need for strategic sales execution. It's got to be repeated from the top. And the top level has to understand why it's important. They have to have kind of had a taste of what that result will look like. But top down and bottom up here are going to be really important.
Yeah, 100% agree with you. And then in terms of the process, the sales leadership needs to partner with ops and enablement to enforce the common practices and common elements of the sales process, right? That's going to be really critical there. And then in terms of support, the sales team needs support in terms of process governance. That needs to exist, because if you're only putting that process in play and not holding people accountable for utilizing the process, you're still not going to get that data and the analytics you need on the back end to make sure that it's successful. In terms of technology, we want the sales teams to consistently leverage what is in the tech stack. Again, you spent the money on it, you're driving it forward, it's come out of that budget line item, and God knows right now it is impossible to get money to do anything. And it can be pulled at the very last moment, as we've all probably seen in these last 12 to 14 months. And then finally, ops is really overseeing the integration of each of these pieces of technology with the overarching revenue tech stack. Which is the revenue tech stack. I know we haven't talked about it much here, but that's something we're going to be introducing down the line on some of our later webinars and talking about. That's really all of the things that are under that account-based everything umbrella. So, from ABM all the way through to customer success, what elements do you have in there, and how are they helping you to drive a process that pushes that strategic success?
Mm-hmm. I would be interested, a couple slides from now, we'll talk about technology again. If in the meantime, anybody wants to have provide suggestions of what they've found to be the magic mix in their tech stack. I'm always interested in hearing about different technologies.
Yeah.
There's
so many out there. I mean, those eye charts we look at from a lot of the analysts, it's funny. It's all right, 4,000 different technologies. Great. How do you pick them?
It's funny. I mean, I've worked in sales technology for 15 years now, and I still see new ones pop up in those eye charts. I can't identify them all. But then let's talk about some of the characteristics of that integrated stage. A lot more benefits here. Joe's favorite phrase is creativity by constraint. And I like that a lot, because it's kind of like when you're a kid and you go bowling, or you take your kids bowling and they put up those blow up things in the gutters so the ball at least stays, in the lane that it's supposed to. This is what that is, right? You have these little blow up buffers for your sales team. They're still staying in the lane, but the ball can kind of shift left to right, which is what you want in ever-changing conditions, right? People need different things at different times, but you still want to have that overarching framework to drive, still you have the predictability there. Sales ops and enablement can more easily execute, informed by the processes and data. You saw in the first two stages, role perspective, both of them were they either couldn't provide any insight, or they could provide insight, but they weren't real confident in it. So at this stage, you're able to become a lot more confident in the data and your reporting and your coaching. And salespeople have an execution and planning playbook to succeed. So this is where you can start expecting your B and C players to continue performing, to level up. Your ramp time is going to be greatly reduced. You're probably going to see reduced churn too of your salespeople at this point.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, they have that training that's in place to be successful and to, like you said, to onboard quickly, right? That repeatable process is beginning to be there. But much to the salespeople maybe being happier in that sense, they're also understanding what their role is and how it fits in the organization, but not necessarily in the bigger picture when we talk about account-based everything, right? So how does that play in? How do they interact with marketing, with customer success, with product in these different areas? That's still a little bit ambiguous to them. And I think as you move up through the remaining stages, that's where that becomes more clear. Opportunistic execution doesn't drive revenue planning, which is great. So we're moving from that state of being hyper opportunistic and very tactical with every deal that's coming in, and focusing on more of how do we develop a consistent pipeline and an approach where we can replace pipeline elements that fall out. We're doing this, or we've done this over the last 6 to 12 months. We've moved away from all of those whale deals that you look at, because guess what? Yeah, you win one of those, it makes your quarter. But if you lose it, it certainly puts you in a really backward position of how you're going to make up for that. So it's driving consistency there and the ability to do that. So you're able to measure trends, but they're limited just to sales. So that's a great start, and you can drive what that good looks like and where efficiency is. And you can actually push coaching on a regular basis. But it's really not that 360-degree view of everything that has to do with the account or with that specific opportunity. You're still lightly mitigating risk and not necessarily being proactive about it.
Yeah, and that 360 view comes with a lot more of that maturity of the entire revenue organization. There's a lot more pieces in there that you don't realize on some of the earlier stages.
We again, that whole fail fast thing that you and I love to do in terms of a lot of this account-based marketing approach and some of these other items. It's, get in there, get your reps in, try it, and if it doesn't serve the greater good in that moment, switch it up and make that slight pivot to change a couple of variables and push forward.
Yeah. Or if, figure out if something is not going to be qualified, don't be afraid to say no to a prospect. If it's not going to be a good fit, it's not going to be a good fit. And then your customer churn is just going to increase. So there's a lot of maturity that comes in that integrated plus zone.
Yeah. In my career, as I've moved from the individual contributor through the leadership roles, my favorite thing to do is tell customers no. And I hate to say it that way, but so many times, I'm sure you all face this. Your clients will try to pull you down a roadmap direction or in a feature direction, or start to have conversations about, slow rollouts of different products, but it removes you from what your overarching goal is. And that's to get long-term viable customers. And when you're just buying churn, you end up in this tailspin that every 2-3 years, depending on your contract lengths, you're just trying to replace those customers and don't have that forward momentum that you'd really like to.
Yeah. Let's talk a little bit more. Now, today we're only moving through integrated. We're going to cover the last two in a webinar in August. But there's so much more complexity to integrated that we wanted to create a slide that was what good looks like in integrated. So if you're here, what should you be thinking about now to get to the top end of integrated so that you're ready to move on to intelligent?
Yeah, absolutely. So we're going to move through this pretty quickly, right? So you really want to have execution focused playbooks. That's where you're starting to drive that defined process of what activities each of your salespeople should be doing and what data they should be collecting, right? In this, consistent use of technology to track both the deal progression and the use of those steps. So you want that technology to reinforce those steps that you've put in play to be successful. That's obviously going to help you define a more predictable pipeline and drive confidence in those forecast numbers. So if you remember back to what we were talking about with each of those personas, this is touching on a lot of those elements that they were looking for. That confidence in your forecast numbers, the consistency in approach, and the ability to track or analyze that data. And then when you jump into the enablement side, these programs are now in place and they're reinforcing good behavior rather than trying to set it up in the first place. Obviously, you want to remove those bad habits with some of that initial training, but what can we do to continually reinforce this behavior and make sure it's moving forward? And again, that real data, you can actually identify trends now and provide recommendations based on the elements of those opportunities or of those specific accounts. And then when you move to the executive level, they're now referring back to sales analytics and that information to inform how they're going to plan revenue, not just for the quarter or the next quarter, but for that whole fiscal year and potentially what marketing and sales needs to be focused on for the next fiscal year. I know that's an activity you and I go through, Laura, is we're looking at, okay, if we drive this much revenue this year and it's correlated to this many marketing qualified leads up front, what do we need to be looking at from a demand generation spend, from a sales outbound activities level? What does that look like for the next 6 to 8 quarters? And that's something that you're able to start doing here. And then finally, your revenue tech stack starts to become more integrated and you're passing those data elements or those key pieces of data between those systems and making more informed decisions there.
These last three pieces are probably my favorite points of this entire presentation. Because this is, I feel like, something we've gotten really good at in the past 6 months is being able to identify those trends, become more integrated with our tech stack, makes it a lot easier. But when you're going back and doing a deal review, I can tell where the marketing touches were at the beginning and throughout, to understand, start looking at those patterns and understand, okay, when somebody attends a webinar, when somebody watches this video, they're more likely to close. And then we can compare that with the sales touches and say, okay, if we send this email or if we have relationships with these 5 people in consistent communication, it's more likely to close. So we can start coordinating all of those efforts together and saving ourselves a lot of time and headache.
Yep. Oh, absolutely. And there's a lot of headaches that can go along with this too. Having inconsistent information and not data to run trends off of can definitely create an issue for you. You end up failing quickly, but then just setting yourself up for failure again if you're not looking at the right stuff.
Yep. And you'll also see here, we've switched the language to revenue tech stack, not just sales tech stack. And at this point too, you might have moved on to not only having a sales ops manager, but a revenue operations manager. And having that person, I can speak from experience, he's been with us for probably 4 months now, 3 months maybe. It's a game changer because they're all looking at the same sets of data and can start suggesting ways to integrate them better, or looking deeper into those trends.
Yep.
All right. Last slide here. Again, sales execution is people, process, and technology. As much as we would love to say, hey, if you adopt our piece of sales technology, Revegy will get you all the way through to strategic, it's just not possible. I could have the best piece of it. Well, here's a more practical example. I have a gym membership, and if I do not actually use it, there is absolutely no way I'm going to see the results. I got my technology in that membership. I got the swipe card, but I haven't been, and I guess most of us haven't been in a gym in a long time.
If you don't swipe it, nothing's going to happen. No, that's so true. You can't reach your goals without a cross-functional approach to this. And granted, now you could purchase Revegy tomorrow and your technology maturity would go to high across the board here, just because of what we do, with the exception of usage. Again, that's the biggest piece there. So you would have a phenomenal integrated system. All of the elements would be there, but if you're not using it, it's not going to get you anywhere. And if you don't have the process in place to drive that forward, it's also not going to get you there either.
Yeah, and I'm interested. We have a final poll here, and we're getting towards the end. So if you all have questions, please go ahead and throw them in the chat. But the poll is, rank your area, or tell us which area your organization is strongest in. They're often not even. If they are, again, fantastic for you. You're doing a great job. But people, process, or technology, usually one is a little bit ahead of the others.
Yeah, that tends to be the case. And look, we've really broken this down to these individual elements, and there's 9 elements here. Realistically, there could probably be 29, but we've kept it to this. It really defines how you could be moving forward in certain areas, but lagging in others. And that's expected. There's nothing saying that you have to consistently progress forward through each of these stages in each category. There's a lot of cases where your technology will move first, your people may move first, or you might get someone in from an early startup that has a phenomenal process that they've used multiple times at other companies. And that's going to be what's first. Your people are going to come next, and your technology is going to be the lagging there. So all of these can be shifted in different ways. And ultimately, you need to progress them all forward at one point or another. So it's really how you approach it is going to determine which move first.
Yep. Look at those results coming up. This would have been my bet. Yeah, 68% say people.
I would have thought process and people would have been a little bit closer, but that's really interesting to see. Technology, I figured that was going to be the lagging one here, just based on the fact that there's so many pieces of tech out there. And unfortunately, 85+% of them are all point solutions. So although it might get you a little bit more mature in one area, it's not going to have that integrated aspect to it where you're going to see consistency across the board in terms of technology. And it's not playing into that revenue stack. It's just kind of sitting alongside or bolted onto your CRM and driving, I have a little bit more clarity in terms of my percentage win rate on these opportunities, or I can see, this relationship a little bit better, or, get some cadences out there more regularly, but it's not combining all of that together.
Yep, that's true. And the process part it's definitely not the sexiest piece of this. I mean, nobody likes planning and building frameworks and playbooks. Like it's kind of the boring part, yeah. But unfortunately it's a necessary evil in order to get the outcomes, consistent outcomes anyway.
Yeah, but I do love how you all seem to have, or the majority of you have, a heavy focus on people. And for me, Laura, I know you're the same way. Culture is really the key driver here. Without the culture of the ability to change, or the acceptance of change, and having a lack of comfort for a period of time being okay, it doesn't matter how much effort you put into process and technology, and how high on the maturity curve you think you're going to be. The people are going to determine whether or not that actually happens. And if you churn those people, you're just starting back at square one across all levels. You're going to be ad hoc no matter what. And that's the key element here, that as you progress these forward, you have to keep in mind that they all have to be moving at some point. You can't be resetting constantly and expect to move from ad hoc to tactical to integrated, and especially not intelligently managed or strategic.
Yeah, very true. Let's move through here. It looks like we're down to the last 10 minutes or so. So we will go ahead and take questions. I know we've been asking for them throughout. Forgot, Joe, I told you I was going to forget this animation on here. We did one animation and I forgot, but this is what we'll be covering in the next webinar. And these are very complex pieces and are going to be a lot of fun to talk to, especially for me on the marketing side, because this is where you really start getting marketing involved, getting CS involved, and the whole thing becomes, well, nothing is really a well-oiled machine, but it becomes closer to that.
It's a machine. It runs. It might be a little shaky once in a while, but it's good. Now, and what we'll do also is on this next is bring this element back into it and talk through how, as you're progressing, how each of these maturity pieces can really drive success in the other areas. With, you know, if your driving process, how that can help with people and technology, and vice versa across the board. So I'm really excited about the intelligently managed and strategic piece too. And I think we're going to introduce some real interesting elements here that are going to help.
Yes, for sure. So we'll go on to the question slide right now. If you have questions, again, drop them in the chat. Looks like we have a couple already. One being, where's the best place to start with people, process, and technology? That's an interesting question because none of them necessarily are easy. You could never call people easy, right? But I would say, we'll see if you agree, Joe. I would say probably the easiest place to start is technology because it's fairly easy to buy something and implement it and tell people to use it. But just because it's easy doesn't mean it's going to work, because you still have to get the people and the process around it for it to actually be used.
See, that's interesting you say technology. So for me, you know, I think you can always buy technology and you can always attempt to hire the right people or train them. So in my mind, process is really where you should start. You should draw on your past experience in other organizations, selling similar products, doing your research in who's doing what in terms of sales processes or methodologies that are out there. Understand how that might fit with your current organization, and then evolve it slightly. As you hire the right people in and as you draw the right technology in that's going to help enable that process, that's when you start to evolve out the inefficiencies. Because no matter what you go into, and look, I love all the sales processes that are out there and the methodologies, whether it's solution selling, challenger sales, or, you know, design-led solution selling, which is something that I've worked on in the past with a number of people. It needs to be unique to your organization, and just taking the cookie cutter approach is going to drive you to failure eventually. It might not be the first month, 6 months, or 2 years, but eventually you're going to outgrow that, or there's going to be inefficiencies that rear their head. And without working forward off of that, you're going to have problems. But so, yeah, so I would go process there.
I would agree with you. That is the most logical place to start. I just said technology was the easiest.
I don't think any of them are easy, right? But I always see processes you can just do research and plug it in.
That's true.
It works. The whole fail.
Well, that's a really good point, and we have another question I want to make sure we get to. But doing research, this is amazing to me. I've spent a good deal of time in consulting and saw a variety of situations. But it's amazing to me how often people don't just go to the Google machine. You don't have to reinvent the wheel. You don't need to come up with a new playbook. You don't need to come up with a new methodology. Just take something that people have already found works, tweak it to your particular environment, and use that as your baseline. It doesn't have to be as overwhelming as you might think or it might feel starting out.
No, agreed.
Couple questions here. Without going all stick, no carrot, how do you recommend getting people to adopt a new system or process? We know it's going to be helpful, but how do we show our frontline managers and individual contributors that it is to help them, not to micromanage them?
There's always going to be an element of big brother for a lot of this stuff that people will feel like, because you're trying to drive trends and understand what's actually happening day to day. So I don't think you're ever going to unseat that completely. But I think this goes back to what Nicole had said earlier when she was talking about showing the value that they're receiving from adopting the process or the technology, or just going down that path. And that's really where it's going to be. So if you take and choose a specific group, like for instance, with us, Fujitsu is one of our larger clients. And we took a step-by-step approach to roll it out through the regions. And it was when we showed success in one region that the other regions really became very interested. And I've seen that in organizations themselves as well. When I roll out a process, if I get buy-in from one salesperson and they're showing success with it, and they go and talk that up to the other groups, you're automatically going to get adoption there. It's going to start out slow. Don't get me wrong, because as usual, it's hard to get salespeople to fill an expense report, let alone do more. And I say that lovingly because I was the same way. But it's going to start that trickle down effect, and you're always going to get just that organic growth, and you're going to have to reinforce it and drive it. But in terms of the frontline management piece, it's going to have to be showing success of the groups. And there's also an element of competition you can layer in there. The gamification aspect of it is always key. If you put people against each other in friendly competition, you're going to get adoption because you're saying, hey, I know this is going to make you successful. The most successful person utilizing it is going to get XYZ in terms of spiffs or whatever it may be.
Mm-hmm. Another one here, Alina, sorry if I'm saying your name wrong. Could you speak more to what triggers or what indicators are there in the evolution from sales ops to revenue ops is part of transitioning from integrated to intelligent?
Yeah,
I want to take this under advisement for the next webinar, especially, but I think, you know, the higher level here too, and I'm going to speak from our experience as well in our transition to revenue operations, is our tech stack started getting pretty large. MarTech does not speak well with sales technology yet. I'm sure we're already seeing that evolve, and I'm sure it's going to continue to evolve. But
wait, to
managing
take that back a step, marketing and sales don't usually speak well to each other either. So that's kind of a whole thing there.
Yeah, I'm going to beat Joe up after this call. But I think once you start feeling that pain point, that's when it's time to switch. If that's what you mean as far as a trigger or an indicator there. A lot of times you might have a marketing operations person. I feel like that's a little bit less of a common role than sales ops. A lot of times your demand generation function is managing the MarTech stack. So when you start seeing that need, when you start doing your account-based plays, we've seen this trend from account-based marketing to account-based everything. Your salespeople should be involved in that. The account plans that they have for new or existing opportunities should be an extension of the account-based marketing plans. Otherwise, you're losing a bunch of intel in between that. And the only way you can connect those dots a lot of the times outside of one-off conversations is having that RevOps role that has their hands on all of the data and can start building a cohesive storyline.
And I think you touched on it perfectly. The cohesive storyline for me is that indicator or that point of evolution. And it is the lack thereof that drives you to say, hey, there's no correlation between my marketing data and how that's converting into my sales data, and then what we're driving from an implementation to customer success perspective. Where are we missetting expectations? Where are we driving too much emphasis on frontline demand generation from an inbound perspective or outbound selling? There is not a true view of what's happening in the organization. And that for us was where it came the point of, look, we had sales ops, we had a Salesforce admin. Now we need to shift to someone who understands Salesforce and the technical side of it, but also can be strategic in terms of how they're going to stitch that story together and those data elements together. So it tells, again, like you said, Laura, that cohesive story from inception of lead or that first marketing hit on the website all the way through to a closed sale. And on one of the recent, was it the board meeting or the company meeting that we did, we actually talked through how we're tracking that approach and looking at every single point of contact with customers, all the way from that first marketing touch through to the end of the sales cycle. And it was a really interesting to light that up and show, wow, this highlights the exact need for revenue operations and a true revenue tech stack.
Yeah, and it gives sales different talking points too. So if I, see that a current opportunity has downloaded our recent ebook, the Ultimate Guide to Sales Planning, shameless plug, I can look at that. Well, now you all can look at it in our CRM too and see that data because we've integrated our marketing technology and our sales technology. So our sales rep can have a better conversation with that customer because they know that that's something that that customer is specifically interested in. So it gives them kind of those cues and hints, which, I mean, tying it back, that's why having that RevOps role is important because they're going to think a little bit differently.
Yeah, and Alina, on this one, we're absolutely going to focus on this as a critical portion of the next webinar as well. That's going to be where we talk around the cross-functional aspect of a lot of this and how all of those elements of the company need to be integrated. So that's going to be really great. So I got another question I'm seeing here. So what are some of the metrics that your customers look at as they're progressing through the stages of maturity? So what are they measuring in terms of progress and success? So there's a few different metrics that they're using within Revegy, but I want to talk outside of that because I don't want to plug that here. But they're really looking at some of the critical elements here. And I would talk through, I would say pipeline development is going to be a critical aspect here. The shrinking of the gap between leading and lagging indicators, which are traditionally pipeline to actual committed revenue, and how you can reduce that gap, the increase in sales velocity, and then I would say both won and loss rates. And why I say both of those and not just win rates, win rates are, hey, how much of my deals am I converting from my initial qualified stage all the way to closed won? But I look at loss rate. How much of my deals am I killing right away and disqualifying properly to not carry them through the future sales stages and waste reps time? As we know, if I remember back properly, I think it's about 16% of a sales rep's time or an individual contributor's time is spent on closing winning deals. The other 80+% is actually spent on administrative tasks or playing around with deals you're going to lose. That's wild to me. So you can incrementally enhance that by 5 or 10%. You're going to see a massive change in the company in terms of what your win rate is, the focus on those winning opportunities, and then the uncovering of more deals. And that's something we did